Hey, how you doing, Liz?
Fantastic. So glad you could join us today. Now, Anders, we've had a full day and we've been learning a lot about what we could do to reduce bureaucracy and make things better in the social economy. But what do you have to share about what we could learn for that?
Well, I think not having listened to all the sessions today, I think it's crucial now that we get into a civilized debate again and free ourselves from our absolutes. We are caught in what we hold to be self-evident, and if we want to move into a net zero emission or a sustainable planet, then maybe there are some things that we have to radically rethink, and it means that we have to listen to different opinions. So we talk about a social economy. It's basically accepting various views. And I think that the biggest threat to our planet is not the coronavirus, but in fact that our minds are infected. First of all, as I said, we lack the openness to challenge our absolutes, to question our own beliefs. And the other part is that we are lacking a understanding of the world. In German, I call it Weltverständlichkeit, the openness to expand our views towards new technologies and to get a general overview. So I think there are challenges on the individual level, but in a social context, I think coming together and getting back to a civilized debate where it's okay to have different opinions, I think that would be a first good step.
Indeed, what a welcome thought, especially in the last year where there were these absolutes and this sort of you're either with me or against me type of mentality. In the past, I've heard you talk about a way of freeing ourselves from these absolutes was to learn and to teach to teach. Could you tell us more about that, please?
Yeah, sure. I mean, basically, we have the trust in our old systems that are, of course, fluid models that are adapting all the time. Capitalism is not a fixed model, but we relate to all of these systems and models as if they were something concrete, right? And one thing is obviously the educational system. We are sending our children to schools to sit like in prison. They have their rows, they have their structure, their hierarchies, and they learn the same thing. And we study for a final test. In Germany, you would call it even Abschluss. You close it out. You get that one grade, and then you start your life. So we are competing with technology on the logos. We are trying to save information with our highly official capabilities of doing so for that one test. And I think everyone can resonate going back, sitting with your children and doing homework. You figure out very rapidly what you like to do in school and what you were forced to do. And I think the skill of learning itself has to be taught in education. We have a fundamental problem with today's society, and that is that we haven't figured out how to teach people, or we haven't figured out how to learn how to learn. So we're taking out the curiosity, we're taking out the exploitation, and we don't have the fundamental skills to learn new things. And that is what we are forcing people into roles and hierarchies and structures. And as I said before, taking that one final test. So everything that is finite must become infinite. And that also relates to politics and, of course, economics and our society in general. So coming from the old economy through the Industrial Revolution to the new economy, the dreams from Silicon Valley of Ferraris and yachts for everyone, that can and will never happen. It must be a sustainable economy, but it also needs to serve our needs for some kind of prosperity. So I think the challenge is to challenge the systems, not to tear them apart and build new ones, but to adapt them and make an upgrade. So capitalism, education, politics need an upgrade to a model that is more dynamic and suited for the 21st century.
How do you think we can do this, Anders, on a functional basis? Today we have members of European Parliament. We have commissioners that are working on writing action plans. We have leaders of charities, social enterprises, and organizations trying to force detailed policy today. What I hear from you is instead of having this finite plan or this Abschluss or this end point of learning, if we set a structure where we can really be open to constantly changing, how do we do that in a legal framework for the European Union, which is some 500 million people? How do we have that level of flexibility at that scale?
Yeah, I think becoming professional amateurs, stop taking the roles and ourselves so seriously, to work really hard, to be passionate about your topic, but to see
It's
yourself
okay.
as an amateur. You are always an amateur in a holistic sense of view. But if you do that very professionally, you can open up for some other opinions. Because I think all these bureaucracies and the structures that we have lack the speed that we need. I think the challenge for the European Union, for example, is that it's very difficult because we don't have one common language. And that shows us how important it is how we communicate. So opening up for radical thoughts, discussing and debating, going for that deep dive, taking the time to think through some topics from various viewpoints. I think we need to have a high tolerance of paradoxes and ambiguities, that we have an acceptance for various views and also an acceptance for uncertainties, for the unknown. And I think that is radical in terms of outlining laws and structures and regulation. We need to have that flexibility in today's society to adapt as we go. It's not long-term or short-term. It's both at the same time. It's not local and or global. It's local and global. It's not stability or chaos. It's stable and chaos. We need to have that type of parallel thinking, and that needs to be in all of those rooms with the entrepreneurs, with the politicians, to be open to discuss these type of things and then move on. So what I think we need is more speed in the execution, but speed in a sense that we have to take a deep dive first and listen to various opinions. Take an example of a debate on how to tackle airline traffics, right? What is the right way to go about? Is it to regulate and stop flying? Do we think that people will stop flying now after spending a year and a half at home? And the private need to go to fly on vacation will explode. That will make things worse in the short term. We could put rules and regulation to that, or we could look at it from a different perspective and say, what do we actually need to do? We need to make flying sustainable. And that takes billions of investment. So in some sense, maybe things has to become worse in order for them to get better. And that needs to be in the setting of the rules and the regulation. Another thing is, of course, striving for zero emission. We need to have lithium and cobalt and all of that stuff. We need to do a lot of mining, which of course is locally at least very, very dangerous and also not particularly environmental friendly. But in a short term, it might cause some damage, but that's the only solution for the long term. And that type of thinking needs to be baked into how we set regulation, how we do a civilized debate, and how people in these rooms discussing it today need to practice the art of being wrong. We need to embrace the art of being wrong. It is okay to be wrong because it's the only way we can progress. As I said in the beginning, we are caught in our absolutes. And I think that's my message to these lawmakers and regulators and entrepreneurs that needs to make money in the short term and want to do a big impact in the long term. We need that type of thinking and execution.
Fantastic advice. I love what you say in terms of rapid iteration and being willing to be wrong. I get that feeling today, in the room that we are standing and that sharing that you're giving now. We have a row of translators simultaneously sharing this in 7 languages and 2 types of sign languages to ensure that we're actually having not just a communication or a dialogue that is of one language only, in one area only, but of many languages, also in a 2-way conversation. We have chat rooms sharing what you're discussing right now. We have after areas. We're pulling everything out to advise policy. I think what you're saying here is, do you imagine that with the digital tools that we have today, it could be something that could enable us to be more iterative and more global in our communications and more sharing? So, for example, if you were saying, be willing to be wrong more, be willing to listen a little bit more, do you think there's some modern technology that we could actually do that? For example, like today, this is seriously the first conference where there has been so much 2-way engagement and not classic stage discussion. Is this a little bit what you're feeling?
I think technology is neither good nor bad. It's what we want it to be, right? There are no limitations. I mean, we could go on for hours about living in a simulation and the potential of quantum technologies, what have you not. But I think it is what we make it to be. We talk about digital transformation, but we haven't defined what we want to transform into. So when I talk about posterity leadership, I talk about posterity, future generation, but prosperity now. So we need to have prosperity now and also for future generation. And that type of thinking need to boil into the technology. So the technology that we create, we have to define what kind of future do we want to build. Future is a verb. It's called to future. It is something we do. And by doing so, we will do a lot of mistakes. And we need that openness, to have that different opinion, to have some errors and have some challenges. The whole part of feeling that gut feeling of being wrong when people challenge you on things that you have no clue about. To be open about your feeling, the vulnerability that is the birthplace for creation and innovation, for trust and transparency and relationship. Those type of things become essential, and technology can, of course, help us with that. But I think the part of technology that technology is good at is efficiency and management. And then we need, on the other hand, leadership. We need to take action and activate and create within a group a space where we can, try things and be wrong. Coming back to the example of flying, I don't want a creative pilot when I fly to Stockholm tonight, trying out a lot of stuff, landing in Arlanda in Sweden. I want it to work. So we need to be very clear about, what is management, what is stability, and where do we allow the chaos, and where do we embrace chaos for the change. And coming back to that in relation to the entrepreneurs, the only boss in the company and even at the political level is the project that you're working on. So we need to put the project in the driver's seat and be open for people to embrace being wrong, embrace their ideas, and also having that vulnerability that strengthens the relationship when we discuss and communicate. And I think that is a hurdle to be managed. We have created very simple social networks with the common field where people can just rant and rave about all the craziness. Tone that down a little bit. Get back to discussing topics and figuring out the essence. When we move on, it's what we have learned. What I have learned when I go out of a discussion and I recognize I was wrong. I'm the only one winning because I realized that I've learned something new, right? And that should be the mentality that we carry on in the discussions. It's not about the person, about the ego. I would say leave the ego at the door, put the cause in the middle and the project, and then let's take it from there.
Exactly, putting the cause in the middle. That we heard this a few times today from the commissioners at the European Commission, from the OECD, and also from the United Nations. They were all talking about stakeholders and not shareholders. And this really resonates with me when I hear you say it's from prosperity to posterity. As a final note, to leaders that are watching today, what would you like them to think about when it comes to posterity?
Well, I think we need to have that parallel, that simultaneous approach. So we need to have stronger local identities that we relate to, where we can do things on a local level, right? Forget about the countries, think about the local, regional level, and then we need to globalize like crazy. We need to come together and do this together. A lot of these challenges ahead are global challenges. We see that with the pandemic, and I think that is the first step. I think what I said before, outlining the cost, the why, but also on the same hand, asking more questions. So opening for whys, a lot of whys, going to that first principle thinking, going to the bottom of, how do we tackle the problem really? I mean, is it banning flights in Germany the right solution for Germany? Or is it to invest like crazy in new technologies? I don't know, but we have to have that debate. And that goes for all the things that we are working on. So I think leaders that think about prosperity need to think about their future generation. And by doing so it becomes infinite. So infinite leadership is at the heart of everything we do today. We come from a finite model where the resources we have are finite, our thinking is finite, our linear models are finite. We need to move into an infinite space and into infinite thinking. And making that more concrete is just thinking about our grandchildren, the children of my wonderful two daughters that also need to have a world to live in, a prosperous world, and we want to build that. And for that, we need long and short-term thinking, local and global. We need to have those paradoxes and tackle them in a dynamic way. And that's where we talked about the stakeholder management, right? It's all about that. If I want to maximize shareholder value, I throw out all my salespeople in August, and at the end of the year, I have an excellent result, and the next year, I file for bankruptcy. So those simple things about the structures of the old models need to be replaced about thinking, real deep thinking and time for thinking. And I think the last final message to the leaders would be, we are doing all this chemical scum optimization that Stephen Hawking related to. We're training our bodies, doing the yoga, going up to the mountains and what have you not, but we are not doing any squats for our minds, some bench pressing for the mind. So all of us just set up at least 2 sessions every week, pick a white piece of paper and do nothing. Train our minds. That's the first step that we can get into that, freeing ourselves from our absolutes and moving into a more dynamic world, striving for what you refer to as dynamic equilibrium.